So as stated, this training is really going to be focusing on understanding not only your new COA guide format, but how COAs work in general, and how those different COAs interact with budgets and how you can request budget reporting from our office. So a brief table of contents for today. First, we're going to go into the background behind COAs. Then we're going to do a nitty-gritty deep dive into all the different components, what they mean. We'll then go into how you could go about requesting new COAs to be created, why you might want a new COA created, and then finish off with that budget reporting piece. So first, going into COA background. So COA stands for Chart of Account String. It is a set of 12 alphanumeric segments that allow you to do the following. You can bill expenses to your department's budget from other departments, track your resource allocations, the amount you have to spend, and then you can also track your expenditures of everything that you've billed to your department. Here is a visual representation of what a COA chart string looks like. The top there is the representation of those 12 segments. Project is further broken down into these additional segments. In order for anything to go into our financial system, the segments in yellow there are required for any financial individual to process your receipts. In terms of what you have to worry about, you don't need to worry about anything in gray or that has an X. And more focusedly, these are the specific segments that we at the colleges use that you'll see on your day-to-day guides. So the first one is the entity number. All of the colleges have the same entity number, and that's because an entity is comprised of several financial units that roll up into one area of campus. So for example, the Vice Chancellor of Academic Affairs is one area of a campus. The fund number is the next number. It's a 5 alphanumeric segment, and it's derived from the resource allocation source that your funding is coming from. So for example, if it's student fee money. The next one is the financial unit. It's a 7-digit string. All of our college financial units start with 10, and that is representative of a COA's project owning organization. So for example, Revelle College Provost Administration is a financial unit. The next one we have is function. That is 3 digits, and it's derived from the purpose of a fund. So what types of expenses should be posting here? So for example, instruction or student services is a good function for a fund. A project is 7 digits. It represents a primary unit of work that can be broken down into one or more tasks. In that breakdown of tasks, a task number can be 1 to 3 digits. It's a breakdown on a project, and it helps you track your expenditures at a granular level. And then finally, currently the colleges only have one sponsored project. So most of you will not be seeing funding sources because they are exclusive to sponsored projects only. But for our one sponsored project, it has a funding source that has 7 to 5 alphanumeric information, and that is determined upon where the sponsor for that sponsored project is coming from. Is it from an internal campus source, or is it from an external source? Overall, these are the primary segments our department uses. Ones that we don't use are program, location, interactivity, interentity, future 1, and future 2. If anyone ever asks you for a component number for these, you'll give them a 0 or a string of zeros if they want a string. In terms of communicating our information to other departments, you'll want to use this format. So you can put all of the numbers separated out by little dots, and anyone who is familiar with COAs should be able to know what you are communicating. So here's an example with one of the college COAs with the entity, fund, financial unit, function, project, and task separated out. In addition to giving this information, you'll also want to let them know that Jingling Li, our fiscal operations manager, is our preferred approver so that your transactions and expenses get processed in the most timely way possible. If you're looking for more information on what your campus partners are looking for when you're doing recharges on campus, or if you're doing a fiscal transfer, fund transfer, we do have designated training videos that go over all that information that are hyperlinked out on the slide here. In terms of where you can find your COA information, is you can find them on the internal COA reference guide for your college and unit. Each college and unit has their own guide. Our primary ones are the Provost Academic Advising Guide, PAA. Student Affairs has two different guides, one for the Dean's Office plus orientation, and then one for residential life. We have a guide for the writing program, and then some of our bonus guides include each writing program director having their own for their stipends and awards. The environmental studies program has a guide, MOM, and then iHouse has their own guide. Something important to note about these guides is they're only shared with employees who have supervisor approvable to use those associated COAs on a daily basis. So if you want any additional sharing done, it will require the unit supervisor approval and request to colleges-fiscal@ucsd.edu. So that could be a provost, a dean, a DRL, or one of their proxies who can do that request for you. And that's really important because we want to make sure that only the people who have everyday approval have access to use those COAs. That way, we're not having anyone charging your COAs without explicit approval or you giving them. And then it also is to help reduce confusion onto which COAs to pick for specific tasks. So really to limit your guides to only the COAs that you absolutely need. With that said, your guides are shared with you in your Google Drive Shared with Me section as of July 2nd. But if you ever lose that link or you can't find it, we do have a new COA 101 page on Confluence where it has hyperlinks out to all of the guides available. So you can click on that link and it'll take you to your guide. These guides are meant to be living files where we update them immediately when Ling and I are notified that a change needs to be made so that you have the most up-to-date information and don't experience any billing issues or having somebody decline your purchase. So you really want to make sure you're not downloading your guides. If you do want to share them in your individual team drives, we recommend instead of downloading it and then exporting it, sharing the link to the guide on a Word document or Excel sheet that you have saved in your team drive instead. Here's a representation of what your guide may look like. This is the one for the provost's office at Muir College, so please do not use these COAs without their permission. But on your guide, you're going to see columns A through J. There's some basic everyday use information at the top. And then below, you'll have one row per COA. And if you want to go ahead and open up your units guide at this time, you have the ability to have it side by side with this presentation. That'll be helpful for this next section that we're going to go through. So now we're going to dive into what each column for the COAs is representative of. So the first column, column A, is going to indicate which unit or area in your college that COA corresponds to. The purpose of this is really to make it very easy to group different COAs together. So being able to tell student affairs versus the writing program COAs apart very easily. Something that is important to note is that some of the areas might have this additional dash faculty control in column A. If you see that faculty control in column A, that means that COA is a stipend or award that has been granted or is exclusive to the individual whose last name is in the task description of that COA. Our most common employees that get awards and stipends are the writing program directors and provosts. However, there are other instances where other employees do get them. What's most important to note is that you cannot use these COAs without that person's written consent before you go ahead and build them. The second column, column B, is representative of the entity. All college COAs roll up into the same entity, academic affairs, for budgeting purposes. Our department is stored and housed under academic affairs. So all college COAs should have the entity of 16110. But note that if you're collaborating with other departments across campus, they might be housed under a different vice chancellor area. So they're going to have a different entity number. And some notable shout outs of areas we work with that do have different entity numbers is HDH, Housing, Dining, and Hospitality, and then PPM, which is Property, Plant, and Equipment. They work on a lot of our construction projects with us. The next column, column C, is going to be where your fund number is. And this is going to tell you where your resource allocation is coming from. In the old system, this was also known as the pot of money, color of money, and is really where a lot of your funding restrictions come from. So what you can and cannot buy on these particular COAs. The colleges have 6 major funding sources that we use in our day-to-day. We're going to go over what each one of those is. So for our first one, funding source 13991, this is a core fund that comes from the campus budget office, and we get one lump sum allocation every single fall. This is the main funds for the provost and academic advising areas. It's typically used for instructional costs, payroll, and your day-to-day regular operating expenses. An important distinction is this is what is called a SOFI fund. So you cannot deposit any revenue into these COAs. So that includes any donations, ticket or swag sales you may have from your e-commerce sites like Eventbrite, Shopify, etc., royalty revenues your lecturers might get from books, sales, etc., and so forth. The next fund we have is 14500. This is also a core fund. It also comes from the campus budget office, and we do get one lump sum allocation every single fall. The official name of this fund is called the Student Service Fees. However, it is still a core fund, and it's used to pay for the regular payroll and operating expenses of student affairs. Something important to note is for residential life, 5% of the professional payroll comes from this 14500 fund, and HDH covers the rest. The next fund we have is one of 2 funds that are managed by the Student Council. So the first one is 14600. This is the AS Student Activity Fees money, and the source is from the Student Life Business Office, and they do this allocation every April. So this money is set aside for student college council spending and should be used to benefit your students because it is a student activity fee. And currently, each college receives 65 cents per student per quarter. That amount is subject to change, and that amount's derived from student voting that's done every year during AS elections. So if the students feel that there should be a revision done, they can either put on the ballot to increase or decrease that amount, and then the students will vote for that as a full to see if it will pass. The second fund I have is the 14601. This is the college activities fees money. This money comes from the Vice Chancellor of Student Affairs office, and they do one allocation every single quarter. Again, this funding is for student-centric spending only. So for example, student programming, you shouldn't be charging any of your office's daily operation expenses here. This is where a majority of the college council money sits, and every single college receives a different rate per student because this amount is derived from your individual college elections when they vote for your student council representatives every year. Moving on to residential life. So Fund 12320 is the Residential Life Fund. This money comes from HTH, and there's a couple of different pots of money that are lumped into this fund that come in a different timing per the year. So the first one is the student programming activity fees allocation. HTH sends this over late fall. It's typically what has been previously known as the heads and beds calculation. So basically, residential life gets a certain dollar amount per resident that is living in their complex to spend towards student programming related things. They do an adjustment in the winter and spring if the total number of residents is higher than what the total number of residents was in the fall. The second type of money that residential life gets is the salary and auxiliary allocation. This is done in 2 disbursements every year. So once in January/February, and then a final adjustment done before fiscal close. This money is intended to cover the salaries and benefits of the professional employees. HDH covers 95% of their overall total. And then finally, when a college hosts summer session, they do get a special summer session allocation from HDH. How the summer session program works has changed almost every single year since I've started working for the UCBO. So more specifics about this information amounts will be communicated out to the DRLs of those areas when they're hosting summer session. And then finally, we have 12319. This is the orientation fund. It comes from student fees billed from the student accounts, and we get one allocation approximately in the fall. Typically, that allocation comes week 3 because they're waiting for enrollment numbers to stabilize. The revenue or fee you get per student is different for every college and can change from year to year. This fee is also derived from student voting that's done around the same time as student council elections. This fund should be used to pay for all orientation related expenses, so programming, OL salaries, OL training, etc., with the distinction of that the new student program coordinator salary is funded by the Student Affairs Fund 14500. Some major behind the scenes fees that are incurred here you may not see or interact with are grounds maintenance that's done annually for your areas, and then the convocation fee as well. Moving on to columns E and F. So this is a double team on the financial unit. Column E is the number, and F tells you the description of that financial unit. So this tells you which department a COA belongs to. So for the colleges, each college has their own unique number, and you can see the numbers here on the left. An important distinction is these numbers are in the order that IPPS entered them when they did the mass transition to the new system. So they're completely random, and they are not in college founding order. So be careful not to fall into that trap. Our next column, column G, tells you the function, and this is what is the spending purpose of that COA. We have 5 major functions the colleges use. So the first one is 400. This is the instruction function, and it can be used to pay for expenses related to the operational needs or direct instructional support of a specific class offering or curriculum. So an example of this would be the writing program. The main COAs of all of our writing programs have this function, and for specific purchase guidance, you should consult the task descriptions on your COAs. The next one is function 410. This is summer session. It has the exact same purpose as 400, but this is specifically for summer-related expenditures only. And again, you should consult your task descriptions for further expense guidance. Next, we have function 430, which is academic support. This is the main function for most of our college COAs, and you can consult the fund and task description combos for further expenditure guidance. The fourth one is 680. This is student services. This should mainly be used for student programmatic purposes, with the exception that this is the function for the operating expenses and day-to-day expenditures for the student affairs and residential life units. And you can consult both your fund and task descriptions for further expense guidance. And then finally, we have function 780. This is scholarship. COAs with this function can only be used to pay for scholarships dispersed by the Financial Aid Office. You should not be using this COA for any other purpose, and these COAs are primarily used by your college operation and program analysts, your OPAs, when they communicate with our office at the end of the year, after your end of the year college award recipients have been chosen. The next column, column H, is the project. So a reminder, a project is a primary unit of work that can be broken down into one or more tasks. A fun fact is that each project has to have at least one task in order to be coded into the system. And then a task is going to be found in columns I and J. I will be your number, J will be the description. Something to note about the task is it is used to track your granular expenses, and it only exists in the project management PPM module. So it's not in the general ledger. So when you get budget reports, you won't see it in a general ledger report. Something that's helpful is that you can think of a project as a main account and a task as a sub account. So looking at the image here on the left, you have the flow chart of the tasks flowing up into the same project. So something to know is if you want to be able to get a report that specifically tracks something that your office is doing, whether it be an activity, a program, an operation, etc., if you want to be able to pull those expenses out on their own and separate them out from the rest of the expenditures you want to do, you do need to make sure that they have their own task in order to do that. So going into some task descriptions and how you should be using different COAs with different task descriptions. Here are our major ones. If you have a COA that has a task description with a DFLT, then this is a default task number, and it's a default COA. It is only in existence for when the system has different coding errors and it's too complex for the system to resolve it, and they need an agent to manually go in and check these cases case by case. So we should not be using these COAs under any circumstances. It really is a last resort catch-all for the system. Similarly, if you have a task that has salaries in the description, this is for UC Path intended purposes only, and you should not be charging any expenses there. If you see a task description that says supplies and expenses, you can charge operational expenses there. You can also use that for your catch-all expenditures and anything else that you all need in your day-to-day. If the task description says orientation, that is a COA that is for orientation use only. If the task description says scholarship, that's for financial aid dispersed scholarship use only, and you should not be charging expenses there unless otherwise instructed by your fiscal contact. If the task description says surplus sales, that is where the revenue for any items your college may sell at the surplus sales office. That is a discretionary fund that can be used for any type of spending, but typically your college leadership uses that for your staff morale expenditures. If its task description has stipend or startup fund, in the description, that is a discretionary fund that is tied to the specific person whose last name is in the description. So you should not be using it without the written consent. If the task description says program or programming, that COA is intended to be used for student programming related expenses only. If it says concurrent enrollment, you can only use that COA for instructional or academic related expenses. And then finally, we have a lot of COAs. We have a lot of descriptions. We couldn't encompass them all here. But for many of the other descriptions, they are associated mainly with gifts and awards, endowment funds, etc. And you should have received guidance when that COA was created on how to spend that particular COA fund. If you don't know what to use it for, you can consult your supervisor, the initial funding letter, or if you can't get to any recommendations on one of those avenues, then you can reach out to our fiscal operations manager and she can help you identify what you should be using that COA for. Now, what happens if you use the wrong COA by accident? You can do one of two things. In most situations, you'll need to submit a fiscal transfer cost transfer request form. We have a video on how to do that so that your fiscal contact can do a manual correction to move the expense onto the right budget. However, if you have submitted a UCBO ticket with your receipt and it hasn't been fully closed yet, you can proactively notify your fiscal contact via that ticket. Say, hey, I filled out this form incorrectly. The COA that's listed is incorrect. Can you please use this one instead? And then your fiscal contact will let you know if they can proactively pivot or if you do need to do a fiscal transfer form instead. Now, if you need to request a new COA, there's a couple of scenarios where our team has experienced this is needed. The first is if you're doing a new program or activity at your college, and whenever you have one of those and you would like a new COA, you can submit an Ask Fiscal ticket and explain in detail what you're looking for that COA to accomplish. How does that program and activity work? Is there specific seasonal times of year that it'll be taking place? Is it continuous? Will you be doing purchases every single week, month, etc.? What types of purchases are going to be related to that program and activity? And then from there, the fiscal operations manager will take a look at your request, take a look at the metrics that you've laid out, and determine whether or not a new COA is a good fit for that scenario, or if it's not, provide some recommendations for tracking for you. The other situation that we get where new COAs are needed is if a new award or funding is received by a college employee. Some of these include the CDIIP over at the writing program funding, In these cases, you always want to forward the formal funding letter you get from another department to colleges-fiscal@ucsd.edu. So then our fiscal operations manager can take a look, see if there's an existing COA that's set up to receive those funds, or if we need to create a new one. The other thing that we do as part of that service is reconciling to ensure that the department who gave you that award and funding letter actually performed the transfer of funds into your budget. Now, talking a little bit more about budget reports. So, there's a couple of different budget reports that are available to the colleges. One is the quarterly budget report, which is a comprehensive report that's provided to each of the college provosts by the fiscal operations manager 3 times a year. So, the fall report is given in January. The winter quarter report that encompasses July to March is given in April. And then the report for an entire fiscal year previously, so for example, this fiscal year, 23-24, is given in September, after all of the ledgers formally close for the year. After the information is communicated out to the provost can then disseminate that information on to their college leadership, and then from there, the leadership to the individual employees under them. Another type of report that you can request is a student salary report. So as a supervisor, to request this, you can submit an Ask Fiscal ticket, and I, the fiscal analyst, will work with you to get you this report. That request does need to include your employee names, their EIDs, and their position numbers. If you do not know any of that information, you can reach out to your HR contact and they can help you pull that. I do highly recommend that you request a student salary report at least one time every fiscal year, maybe a month or so after your students start, just so you can make sure that they're being charged and billed correctly and how you want to see them. The third type of report you can request is a PPM cost breakdown report. This is going to show you every single expense that's hit your COA at the task level. You can request this again with an Ask Fiscal ticket. We do need to take into account our team bandwidth considerations based on the time of year. We may have limited availability, but at least we will commit to providing you a quarterly breakdown report if you reach out and request for it. For this request, you do need to give us the entire COA numbers that you want to be included in this report. The fourth type of reporting we do is student council orientation. This comes quarterly and is managed by the programs and events analysts at our office, Victoria Morgan. And you can submit requests for this type of reporting by emailing colleges@ucsd.edu. And then finally, you can ask for a telecom report. This can be also requested via an Ask Fiscal ticket. Again, we do need to consider our bandwidth, but we will commit to doing this at least quarterly for you if you ask for it. In order to perform this reporting, I need every single phone number that you want listed. So that includes landlines, work cell phones, hotspots, etc. And then our team who works on budget reporting is our fiscal operations manager, Ling. And then myself, the fiscal analyst. You can reach both of us at colleges-fiscal@ucsd.edu or by submitting an Ask Fiscal ticket. And then our events and programs analyst, Victoria Morgan, can be reached at colleges@ucsd.edu. And that concludes the end of the presentation. If you need additional resources or have questions, you can always email us at colleges-fiscal@ucsd.edu. You can pop into office hours. Office hours for July and August are set aside for your new COA guide questions. We also have a fiscal training page where you'll be able to find the slide deck from this presentation and the recording to revisit if you want to. You can also find the recording on our YouTube channel. And then we do have a COA 101 page that we built out on Confluence that not only stores your guide links, but it has a lot of helpful infographics and FAQs that our team has developed for you all. And with that, I am going to